There weren't many other cartoons in the 80s and 90s that were quite as influential as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. As with any popular cartoon, the property was licensed out to a game development company, in this case Konami, and games were produced. In 1989, 2 were released. One notoriously hard, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the NES, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the arcade game was released to arcades everywhere. I remember playing it for the first time at a Showbiz Pizza, and I think it was at a birthday party. But when the NES port was announced, I was incredibly excited. I don't remember how I found out that the NES game was coming out, but once I did, I had to have it. A bunch of my friends got it, and we played it anytime we could, but once I got mine, I was part of the cool kids club. So let's take a look at both ports of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a side-scrolling beat-em-up starring our 4 favorite shelled reptilian martial artists, Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo. Unless you are playing the 2-player version of the arcade cabinet, you have to use the coin slot relative to the turtle you want to play as. The turtles each have their own signature color and weapons, but otherwise mostly play the same. The game starts in April's burning apartment building, with the journey ending in the Technodrome. You'll fight your way through hordes of robotic foot soldiers as you try and save April O'Neil and Splinter, then finally take on the Shredder himself. You'll run into plenty of the Ninja Brothers adversaries along the way, such as Bebop and Rocksteady, Baxter Stockman, General Trag, and of course, Krang and Shredder. The graphics are incredibly colorful and detailed, looking as much like the cartoon as video games of the time would allow. The music is catchy and enjoyable, with that arcade-sounding twang to the electronic instruments. The sound effects are a little tinny, but the voice samples are all really cool and they don't get irritating like they do in so many different video games released in later years. The gameplay is fluid and fun. There are only 2 buttons in addition to your joystick, one for attack and one for jump. Your turtle is responsive to the controls and will generally do what you tell him to, with some minor exceptions. You'll be tearing through ninja bots as soon as you start the game. Getting the right jump kick down can be tricky, and the special attack is hard to pull off if you can't get the timing down. It's tough when you aren't playing with a group of friends, however. Foot soldiers will gang up on you, and bosses will knock you away from them as soon as you land a hit. Needless to say, if you're emulating it, you pretty much have unlimited lives, so it's just a matter of time before you reach the end. Throughout the game, you'll be treated to some minor cutscenes. Though the cutscenes generally have limited animation, they look like they're straight out of the TV show. At the end of the game, your turtle escapes the exploding Technodrome, and a blob of text will debrief you from your mission. The NES game was titled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, to help differentiate itself from the previously mentioned Turtles game that was released a year prior. The game is a fantastic port of the arcade original, and you're able to select one of 4 turtles, and you can even have a friend join you in the arcade action. This port generally follows the same set of stages as the arcade original. You start in April's burning apartment, and then chase the Foot organization to save her, then Master Splinter, and eventually beating down the Technodrome's door to challenge Krang and Shredder to save the world. The graphics look great for the NES. Backgrounds and characters are detailed and are shaded very well for an NES game. TMNT 2 does suffer from a lot of sprite flicker to handle all the sprites that appear on screen at once, and it does look a little janky, but you get over it when you realize that there is virtually no slowdown. Controlling your turtle is about as tight as it gets on the NES. You jump with A and attack with B, standard for any NES game. The special attack is easy to use and will kill most enemies with one good thwack. Hit detection on some of the smaller enemies like Mousers is a little spotty, but it's pretty darn good on most everything else, including the bosses. The bosses can still knock you around pretty good if you don't approach them the right way, which I'm not completely sure that I figured out, but they're generally easier with a friend. The NES port contains most of the same cutscenes as the arcade, and they all look pretty good. It's a great experience and a worthy port of the excellent arcade title. Obviously, there are some differences between the two ports, or I wouldn't be doing a palette swap, so let's take a look. The first and most obvious difference, like most of the palette swaps I've done, is the graphics. The arcade version looks fantastic. Some arcade versions that I've looked at in the past made such a great transition to the NES that the pixelated and limited graphics came out to be more charming and memorable, particularly with a game like Contra. This isn't quite as prevalent here. While the NES game looks good, there is no denying that the arcade version looks way better. Another graphical difference is that in the NES version, each turtle has his own shade of green, and it's a neat little touch. The NES port was notorious for its shameless product placement for Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut signs are everywhere in this game, but at least they're only shown in urban areas where it makes sense. These signs are not present in the arcade version. It's a small thing I noticed, but it's kind of cool to see the TCRI logo on the side of the truck in the parking lot stage in the arcade. It's a cool nod to the backstory of the Ninja Turtles, with TCRI being the company that created the mutagen that morphed a few Pet Shop Turtles into the Ninja Brothers we know and love. This is obviously not included in the NES. On the Nintendo, the foot soldiers all only take 2 hits. On the arcade, the Mechanical Menace seems to be able to take a few more licks, though they still aren't too tough to beat. Also, the Turtles will sometimes toss the foot soldiers in the arcade game at the end of their combos, where this obviously doesn't happen on the NES. Additionally, striking the foot soldiers sounds a lot more satisfying on the Nintendo than it does in the arcade. A minor difference that doesn't really impact the game is that the music in the sewer level is different between both versions. I'm partial to the NES one myself, but that may only be because I grew up with it. The cutscene following the face-off with Baxter Stockman in the sewer includes Bebop and Rocksteady on the arcade, and Baxter in his fly form on the NES. Additionally, Baxter Stockman appears as a boss in his fly form, replacing a second battle with Bebop and Rocksteady. This was likely done to both add some variety and also avoid limitations of having 2 bosses on screen at once. On both versions, when you hit the jump and attack buttons at the same time, your turtle will pull off a special attack. They are all pretty much the same, except in the arcade version, Raphael will do a bit of a different move, with a sliding kick instead of a jumping weapon swing. I did notice that the special move was a little harder to pull off on the arcade version, but I'm not sure if that's my controller or if that's just the way it was designed. One of the most well-known differences between the 2 versions of the game is that Konami added 2 stages to the NES. The Snowy Park stage with a polar bear-looking boss, and a weird Japanese-inspired apartment later in the game with a Shogun robot guy as the boss were both included. Both stages add unique enemies like jumping snowmen and robot ninja that aren't regular foot soldiers. Also, these stupid tires. The jump kick is pretty useful in the NES game, and easy to pull off. Just jump and then hit the attack button and you'll kick like a boss. On the arcade cabinet, depending on where the turtle is at in his jump or how much speed he has going into it, he'll do a different jump attack or kick when the attack button is pressed. This can be annoying if you end up pressing attack at the wrong point and get a weapon swing instead of a kick. The levels in the arcade version seem a bit shorter than their NES counterparts. The first level in particular is the best example of this. Like a lot of other NES beat-em-up ports, only one type of enemy will show up on screen at once, versus the arcade where multiple enemy types can appear, and sometimes the bosses will even show up before you've cleared out all the foot soldiers. There is a Konami code present on the NES version. If you have problems making it to the very end with only 3 lives and 3 continues per playthrough, you can enter a code for 9 lives, a stage select, or both. The arcade doesn't have a code to my knowledge, but obviously you can keep pumping in quarters to keep your life count high. When it comes down to it, both of these are really good, and they're both a lot of fun. And normally I pick the NES version as my favorite, because they're the ones I grew up with, or they're the ones that I enjoyed more. But in this case, I'm gonna have to go with the actual arcade original. I just think it plays better, there's some more variety to the gameplay, and it looks great. There's not a whole lot of slowdown. It's just a really solid game. Sure, there are 2 extra levels in the NES home version, and you got the Konami code, but I don't know, something about the arcade game is just just so much better. It just feels a lot better. Not saying this is bad, because this is still an excellent game. So are you a bigger fan of the NES version, or is the arcade version your cup of tea? Let me know. Let's start a discussion. Also, if I missed anything, bring that up as well. I'd like to see your thoughts. Tune in for my next video. It will be a face-off between a game that was released in the United States and a game that was released in Japan. So, 2 different games. Again, as it should be. But they were released in different regions, so it'll be interesting. I appreciate you guys watching. Later.